All right, so draft recap, Indianapolis Colts edition. So what you see on the screen right over there is going to be the players, then the position that they play, where they were picked, and where the consensus big board had them getting selected. So you see the big one, the one that is going to completely determine this draft essentially is Anthony Richardson. Unless you somehow get several like Pro Bowlers later on, which has happened, but usually doesn't. Really, what's going to happen is people are going to look at this draft and say it was a good one or a bad one, depending on if Anthony Richardson succeeds. Now, again, a lot to talk about with Anthony Richardson. I've made a whole film study on him earlier that's on this channel. Search Jackson Kruger Sports Anthony Richardson. It will come up if you're interested. But, again, getting someone who has the highest potential in this draft class, and at the quarterback position, that's the goal. You want a superstar quarterback. The way the Colts have won a Super Bowl in the modern era is with having Peyton Manning. Richardson, if he was a superstar quarterback, it'd be very different than how Manning was a superstar quarterback. But regardless, that is what that's what you would like to see have happen. And again, maybe I'll touch on him more at the end. But plenty of stuff has been already said about Richardson. So the other picks are still very important. They still matter a ton. Obviously, what we tend to pay attention to is the quarterback, but doesn't mean we shouldn't pay attention to this other stuff. And, Julius Brents, some people had as a potential first-round talent. The consensus had him at 52. He goes at 44. That feels about where I would have him. Maybe I'd be closer to consensus than him, but there's not a big jump there. Not the fastest corner, but a big corner at 6'3". I think he could actually, we'll have to see exactly what scheme the Colts run this year, but, with a new coaching staff and everything. But I certainly think that they could be doing some, I think that he could fit a specific scheme very well, which I assume they will be doing, because why would you draft him if you're doing a different scheme? So I think that, again, big physical corner who can, who can legitimately make some plays, should be very good. Don't expect him to cover Tyreek Hill one-on-one, right? Not a fast guy. That's just not his thing. But again, sometimes you don't necessarily need guys who can do everything. Those guys are great, but sometimes it's like, hey, give me a guy who I know what he can do and I can use him properly. That's what Brents could be, and could be an effective player. So that's what he's bringing to the table. Then we have Josh Downs, who, my expression is never let a day 2 of the draft go by without drafting at least one wide receiver or safety. They get the wide receiver here, Josh Downs, and it's kind of what the Colts have been doing a bit, is getting receivers in rounds 2 and 3, not necessarily spending first-round picks on receivers, and certainly not getting them in free agency, but getting these guys who can play, and I think Downs could be another guy who I could see playing. He is someone who I had as a top 10 receiver on my top 10 receivers list. Only 5'9", 171 pounds. And again, that's just the weird thing about this draft class in general. There were a ton of just small slot receivers, basically. That was this draft. But hey, if that happens, okay, well, not every team needs a small slot receiver. So at pick 79, you can pick up someone who can do some nice things. Like you see, 48th on the consensus big board, but they get him at 79. That's just good value. And I'm always a fan of getting guys who have good value, and that's what he is. Blake Freeland, the tackle out of BYU, someone who, when I did my mock drafts, I selected him in mid-rounds pretty frequently. He's someone who I kind of found out about him more sort of later on in the draft process. 90th on the consensus big board. They get him at 106. Someone who has very good analytics against weak competition. And those guys are always a little bit weird to evaluate, because he did play for BYU. Competition, it's not like he's playing for Alabama, that's fair to say. But still, I like a guy who has good analytics, and he has those. To me, that's the first test you have to pass. And for, when you're picking in the hundreds, most guys don't pass that test. So if you can find a guy who does, sure, go ahead and take him. Bit of a one-year wonder as well, but definitely someone that I'm personally a fan of, and I think that he could, again, they got a good offensive lineman later on in the draft last year who fell a bit. I could see them potentially having something like that happen again. Next up on the list is an insane fall, one of the bigger falls of this draft class, a guy who, name I still have not figured out how to pronounce, I won't say it, we'll call him Double A, right? Double A here was the 43rd on the consensus big board, but he fell all the way to 110. Now, I was not as crazy on this guy as other people were. I get why he fell. I think that's reasonable, but I don't know why he fell this far. That's surprising to me. So basically, he's one of those many players that freak athlete, but doesn't necessarily have the production to match the athleticism. But a lot of times those guys go pretty high. Like, the Tyree Wilson this draft went number 7. Trayvon Walker went number 1 last year. And I'm not saying that his athleticism is of those guys, but I don't think it's that far away that they should be getting picked 100 picks apart necessarily either. To put it into perspective, he's 282 pounds and ran a 4.49. I mean, that's what we're talking about here with athleticism. How much does that matter on the football field? I don't know, but it's interesting and worth taking a flyer on at pick 110 just for that alone. Again, plenty of picks still to go over as they had, got a lot of picks, and that's always good. More darts at the dartboard. Darius Rush, another guy who, again, they're getting guys who aren't necessarily household names, but are just guys who fell. Darius Rush was, 81st on the consensus big board. He was 70th on PFF's big board, ran a 4.3 at 6'2". I mean, this is a guy with athleticism, and I think he was slept on a bit as well. To me, third rounder, maybe that feels a little low. That's what he was projected at, and he goes pick 138. That's very fascinating. We then have Daniel Scott, safety, who, again, we're kind of getting into the point now where they got a lot of players who were, where they got drafted at feels about right. Daniel Scott had a great 2021 campaign, not great in 2022. Also a bit of an older prospect at 24 years old. So that's, I think, part of why he fell. But again, a guy I'm not too hard on taking a flyer on. Again, we're talking, when we're in the 150s at this point, you're not going to get a perfect prospect, but someone who has shown that they can be a good prospect might still be worth it at that spot, I would think. Will Mallory, don't know much about him, to be honest. He's not someone who I don't really get exactly what his appeal seems to be. Didn't have incredible production, not really great athleticism either. Feels like he belongs in the NFL, but I'm not sure to what degree. Feels more like a depth piece for me than anything else. And then Evan Hull, pick 176. He was, right around there on the consensus big board. I like drafting running backs at this point. I think that a lot of times they can come in and legitimately play well right away. Now, he's not going to be a starter, right? You have Jonathan Taylor, but hey, Jonathan Taylor was hurt last year. What if you need him again? What if you need someone else again, is what I mean to say. You have Zach Moss now. You have Deion Jackson, Darrington Evans. But, getting another guy in the mix, I'm a fan of. Then you have a bit of an off-the-wall pick with Titus Leo at the edge rusher position. Again, another guy I haven't really evaluated too much. Once we get into the 300s, okay, some of those guys I don't fully have a great look on. But, again, could be a depth piece potentially. Bit of a reach, but when we're into 200s, go ahead, reach. I don't care. Then a couple guys, Jalen Jones, probably just going to be a special teamer, I would assume. Although, again, another guy one of these guys who weirdly falls. You see someone who's picked 221 at the cornerback position, you're like, oh, okay, special teamer. But maybe not. Maybe they like him. Because, again, some people did like him enough to say, hey, he's worth taking, an actual look at, not just someone who is, going to be a special teamer. I don't know, but potentially there's that. And then Jake Witt, a guy who, again, I'm assuming is just going to be offensive line depth, if nothing else. So a lot of good picks here, not really any bad picks. No pick I'm like, ooh, I hate that one. In fact, there isn't a single one that I think is a bad pick, which when you pick as many times as they did, just hitting your spots, right? Hit your free throws. And I think that's what the Colts did, and maybe had a couple threes in there as well. So I'm a fan of this draft. What do you guys think? Let me know in the comments below. Always love hearing from you. And of course, as always, thanks for watching.